Yo, what the fuck is going down, everybody? It's your boy Sauceman X. I'm checking back at you niggas with another goddamn video today. But anyways, man, we're back with another political video, goddamn bitch. And you already see this shit by the title. This video is obviously going to be about the things that's been going on in politics within the past few days. And you already see this shit by the title. This video is obviously going to be about Democrats, okay? Democrats, okay, in the Texas Senate who essentially decided to leave, for absolutely no legitimate reason so they can try to oppose, the passing of voter integrity or voter ID laws for absolutely no legitimate reason. So I'm going to be talking about that and all the hypocrisy that's within that and the entire hypocrisy behind voter ID laws and how Democrats, are obviously opposing voter integrity because of potential, bad intentions in the future. So I'm going to be talking about that. And I'm also going to be talking about Joe Biden, okay, once again, trying to go against the Pennsylvania audit because I believe yesterday he did a speech in Pennsylvania to try to go against regular people who want voter integrity and actually want to determine the legitimacy of the election results. I'm going to be talking about that and how Joe Biden decides to inaccurately compare people who actually want voter integrity to Confederates in the Civil War, which makes absolutely no sense and it's an absolute absurd contention. So I'm going to be talking about that and all the hypocrisy within that and what we can actually do in the future to actually stop, the Democrats from trying to stop voter integrity in future elections. So anyways, let me just go ahead and get right on into this. So going on to the first point of this video, which is obviously Texas, okay, passing voter ID laws, okay, because we already know that plenty of states have already been doing it. A few months ago you had Georgia, once again, making the correct decisions. You also have people like, Ron DeSantis in Florida mandating voter ID laws, getting rid of ballot harvesting, potentially, getting rid of mail-in ballots. You also have audits going on in Arizona and Pennsylvania. So obviously there's a lot of good things happening as it pertains to determining the legitimacy or actually verifying the potential legitimacy of the next presidential election, because we're actually taking extra measures to ensure voter integrity, which is pretty much what everyone supports in this country, including the vast majority of people, okay? The vast majority of people, even the vast majority of people in the black community, because I believe they did a poll in Georgia, about the voter ID laws, and 80% of the people, in the black community actually supported voter ID laws, because it only makes logical sense to implement voter ID laws. We've been knowing it for the longest time. You need a voter ID, you need an ID, to buy a house. You need an ID to, buy alcohol. You need an ID to do, basic everyday things. So we already know why not, mandate voter IDs for one of the most important things, or the most important thing that someone can actually do, to the point where we actually need to determine the legitimacy of the votes that are actually being counted, which is obviously done in an election. So we already know it obviously makes sense to actually have voter ID laws, but for some weird reason, okay, we have these Democrats, okay? We basically have these Democrats who, they were basically opposing, the Texas Senate actually trying to pass in voter ID laws, and they try to, block the passing by not even voting at all, and they basically left a significant portion of Democrats decided to leave for absolutely no legitimate reason, and I believe, they were taking pictures of each other in a bus or some shit like that, and they basically just fled the entire scene, which makes absolutely no sense, okay? It literally makes absolutely no sense, and it's just more proof for why Democrats don't actually care about voter integrity, because they're insinuating that they actually don't. As I said earlier, they don't want people to actually verify the identity of who the person is when they actually go in and vote. And we already know this actually stems from an entire narrative that Democrats have been trying to push throughout this, the past few fucking years actually, which is obviously the entire premise that voter ID laws are racist, or, if you support voter ID laws, you support voter suppression and racism, which literally makes absolutely no sense. And most people in the black community don't even support that. And it literally insinuates that black people don't know how to get IDs, okay, which is obviously very fucking racist, implying that black people don't know how to get IDs to try to push a left-wing Democrat narrative when most people in the black community don't even agree with that. And, and obviously in assuming that black people are too incompetent to get voter IDs either proves that Democrats are completely racist, or they actually want to engage in potential election fraud, because we actually need voter IDs to determine that the person who's actually voting is actually from the state that they're actually voting in, and plenty of other precautions, like is this person actually a U.S. citizen, which obviously implies that Democrats actually want these people to potentially not be U.S. citizens and not actually have a legitimate vote that's actually legal, and still have them vote in the elections, which proves why they're against voter ID laws. So we already know that's basically what Texas Democrats are protesting against, which makes absolutely no sense, which is what these people are protesting against for absolutely no legitimate reason. And we already know that in my personal opinion, just like the Texas Republicans actually agree with me on this, in my personal opinion, these people should be arrested, okay? These people should clearly be fucking arrested. And of course, people on the left are going to be like, oh, that's actually tyranny. These people are just protesting, voter ID laws, and just because they left and didn't vote for it and trying to actually stop voter integrity from happening in future elections, somehow that's not worthy of being arrested, which literally makes no sense because taxpayers, okay, literal taxpayers are literally paying these people's salary, and these people are choosing not to do their job as it pertains to determining the legitimacy of the future elections. They're literally they get paid by the taxpayers, and they're not even doing their job, and they just fled the entire scene to actually oppose voter integrity laws. So we already know this clearly is worthy within being in the bounds of arrest, so these people should obviously be arrested for obvious fucking reasons, because they're actually opposing voter ID, which literally makes absolutely no sense. And that obviously leads me on to my next point, which is obviously Democrats are most likely in favor of continuing mail-in ballots. And of course I can't really go into the details of this entire situation because YouTube would probably try to delete this video, but we already know that they're actually continuing to try to support mail-in ballots, because we last year they were essentially trying to be in support of mail-in ballots because it's the coronavirus and people can't leave their houses for some weird reason to actually vote, so we need mandatory voter ID, mandatory mail-in ballots or some shit like that, which we already know that there's no reason to implement it anymore because COVID is almost pretty much fucking over with. Of course it's not completely over with, but the vast majority of people are leaving their fucking houses. Most people are not on lockdown, so there's no reason to continue to do mail-in ballots. But of course, Democrats are going to continue to be in favor of it, okay, when there's absolutely no legitimate reason for it to be implemented, and it's already been proven that mail-in ballots, you can actually just mail out as much ballots as you possibly can without actually verifying, who's actually voting and verifying if the vote is actually legal or not, considering that they, in some of these states, they were doing mandatory mail-in ballots, where they actually, sent out mail-in ballots to every single, person in the entire state that is actually, eligible to vote. And you can obviously fill out these mail-in ballots without actually being the person that it was sent to. People can move out of their fucking houses. People, people can actually die and people can still fill out their mail-in ballots. So there's really no legitimate way. It's not even watermarked. There's no legitimate way you can actually go in, and bring in these mail-in ballots and expect it to be 0 cases of potential voter fraud. The only way, okay, the only way to actually determine the legitimacy on whether it was voter fraud or not is to actually audit the vote. But Democrats are obviously even against that for absolutely no legitimate reason, which obviously implies that they don't actually want election integrity. So this is essentially what these Democrats support for absolutely no legitimate reason. And this obviously implies that Democrats are actually scared of voter integrity, which obviously implies that if there actually were a case where voter ID will be implemented, they would most likely be terrified because more votes would be legitimized and people will actually know the legitimacy of a vote if voter ID were to be implemented. Obviously, in my opinion, this is obviously going to be terrifying Democrats because the entire, concept of having votes in an election be more legitimized because people actually know the particular individual that's voting and he's obviously legally registered to vote, and it's even more verified by having a voter ID. The whole concept of that, okay, is making Democrats afraid, which obviously implies that if they know that an election is verified as much as it possibly can be, they would most likely lose elections. And these people, completely fleeing the entire situation, fleeing the entire Texas Senate implies that. So anyways, that's literally some crazy shit. And going on to the next point of this video, which is obviously Joe Biden, okay? Joe Biden, once again, for some weird reason, Democrats are completely against voter integrity, obviously with the entire audit situation. So we already know that Joe Biden, essentially, he basically gave a speech yesterday where, he was basically speaking out against the Arizona audit for absolutely no legitimate reason, which, continues to further suspicion of potential malintent, in the future and potential future elections. So we already know that, Biden basically went in and gave a speech, and he literally compared, okay, this is the crazy part, he literally compared people that were simply in support of the Arizona audit, or in other words, in support of people actually trying to verify the legitimacy of the election results. He tried to compare those people to Confederate soldiers in the Civil War, okay, which literally makes absolutely no sense. Okay, there's literally no possible comparison, and he obviously has this weird fixation where he's trying to compare Trump supporters or people that stormed the Capitol even though they just walked in and just did a misdemeanor and just trespassed and most of them didn't even commit any crime or any form of vandalism. All these people, okay, literally trying to compare these people. It's like, this is the worst attack since the Civil War. This is the worst attack on democracy since the Civil War, which makes absolutely no sense because we're literally not even attacking democracy at all, and we're literally just trying to determine the legitimacy of the election results, and we're doing an audit that's legal, okay, and still falling within the bounds of being constitutional to actually determine the legitimacy of the election results. So we already know that Joe Biden is going to try to make it seem like that's a horrible thing and it's illegal, and you're basically just as bad as the Confederates who killed hundreds of thousands of people during the Civil War and enslaved millions of people, somehow it's just as bad and it's just as much of an attack on democracy, which makes absolutely no sense, and it's clearly filled with logical fallacies, and it's obviously filled with complete mischaracterization, and it's a form of propaganda to mischaracterize people that actually want to determine the legitimacy of the election results. So we already know that Joe Biden's argument is that you should not be allowed to do audits. Okay, you should just blindly believe everything the government tells you about the election, and there's no way that you can possibly even audit the vote to even verify the election despite it being legal. And as I said earlier, audits are a good thing. Okay, audits are a good thing. As I said earlier, it was definitely possible. Okay, I'm not saying it actually did happen, for YouTube's community guidelines, but it's definitely possible for all these considering all these mail-in ballots that were basically sent out to millions of people that potentially may have not have voted in the election, millions of people that people could have gotten ballots and written down a different name. It is definitely possible for voter fraud to happen, and it's definitely possible for voting irregularities to happen during elections, and it's definitely possible for people to actually break the law as it pertains to bringing in an illegal mail-in vote. That's definitely possible, okay? And we're actually just looking into the context of the situation. And of course, the only argument that people on the left has to say against an audit is to make it seem like, the people that are making the audit, they're going to manipulate the election results. They're going to manipulate the election results, or there's completely no way. It's completely impossible for anyone, because, everyone that votes in an election cares so much about voter integrity, and it's completely impossible for anyone to, use the mail-in ballot to potentially cast in an illegal vote. Nobody would ever even do that, and, everyone's just an amazing person. They're never going to commit voter fraud. They're literally implying that's basically reality, okay? As if nobody will even try to bring in an illegal vote during a presidential election, despite, I'm pretty sure, pretty much every election in history has had at least some cases of voter fraud, including this 2020 election. So we already know this literally makes absolutely no fucking sense, and it actually makes them conspiracy theorists, okay? Because, people that, who don't accept the results of the 2020 election, if, those particular individuals are conspiracy theorists, then you would be a conspiracy theorist as well by saying that, the people who are bringing in these audits in these swing states are going to manipulate the results. Because what's the argument of people who say that there was election fraud in 2020? They're literally saying that somebody manipulated the results, even though according to them there's not enough evidence to prove that point. Well, there's not enough evidence to prove that this audit is doing the same thing, so that makes you just as much of a conspiracy theorist as people who are denying the 2020 election results. And we already know that the best way to find out, as I said earlier, the best way to find out if people had malintent, in an election, and actually, determine the legitimacy of an election results, and determine that maybe actually no one had any bad intentions when voting through mail this year, and there was totally no election fraud, through mail-in ballots, in the 2020 election, the best way to prove you right is through an audit, okay? So it would only make logical sense to prove, to actually have an audit and actually support the audit to determine the legitimacy of the election results. But for some weird reason, Joe Biden is completely against that, even though his entire argument doesn't make any sense and it's logically inconsistent and is just flat out wrong. He's basically going against something that's perfectly legal, and he has this fixation to compare us to people who fought in the Civil War just because we want voter integrity, which makes absolutely no sense. And it's just more government-run propaganda. And my last point of this video, it's obviously, once again, potentially an admission of guilt. So we already know that, Joe Biden is clearly, feels the need to go in, give this entire speech, on election integrity, just because, while going against people who are engaging in election integrity the most throughout this entire audit in Pennsylvania, as well as the one in Arizona, completely going against it for absolutely no legitimate reason. But it obviously implies that these people are actually terrified of what's actually may come of the audit. Well, we don't know what exactly is going to come of it. Maybe there was election fraud, maybe there wasn't election fraud. We don't know at this fucking point, but we already know that they're obviously terrified. And if you truly was confident, okay, if you were truly confident that you won an election, if you were truly confident about election integrity, and you actually cared so much about election integrity, why would you be opposing this audit? Okay, why would you be so terrified of this entire audit, and the entire the entire premise behind determining the legitimacy of the election results? If you truly knew that you won the election, it wouldn't really matter, okay? Like when Trump won the election in 2016, if there was an audit done back then, it wouldn't really matter. Trump wouldn't speak out against it because he knew that he won the election in 2016. But for some weird reason now, Democrats are so reluctant to an audit because they actually don't like the concept of determining the legitimacy of the election results, which implies that they're actually terrified of the election results that they supposedly won. Okay, so it doesn't even make any sense. So we already know that this implies that, there could be some, malintent that they may have in the future, as it pertains to people trying to determine the legitimacy of the election results, which is why they don't actually care about election integrity integrity, which is what I've proven based on everything I said in this video. So anyways, tell me what you think in the comment section and shit. Just my opinion of this entire situation about the election, voter ID laws, and the audits. We'll see what comes with the audits. Anyways, tell me what you think in the comment section and shit. It's your boy, Sauceman X. I'm checking the fuck out of your peace.